Welcome, friends. This lodge passes on the path of truth as it was originally transmitted to us. This path in action has always been before us within the laws of nature. It was noted that centuries may go by before any messenger will present a more comprehensive message than that transmitted to us in the 19th century by H.P. Blavatsky. Neither modern science nor modern religion have more than elements of this message, as both are based on materialistic conceptions of man and the universe. Theosophy shows the path to perfection, but we must assimilate its message into our daily lives. So in our meetings, studies, observations of nature's laws in action and otherwise, we work to make Theosophy a living power in our lives. We work independently and with each other to achieve a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. Our work is too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. We hold that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching. We have neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers. The sole bond between its associates is the furtherance of unity. We regard as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization. And we welcome to our association all who are in accord with the declared purposes of our declaration and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. Today's reading is from the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is speaking. Hear again, O thou of mighty arms, my supreme words, which unto thee who art well pleased, I will declare because I am anxious for thy welfare. Neither the assemblage of the gods nor the adept kings know my origin, because I am the origin of all the gods and of the adepts. Whosoever knoweth me to be the mighty ruler of the universe, and without birth or beginning, he among men, undiluted, shall be liberated from all his sins. Subtle perception, spiritual knowledge, right judgment, patience, truth, self-mastery, pleasure and pain, prosperity and adversity, birth and death, danger and security, fear and equanimity, satisfaction, restraint of body and mind, almsgiving, inoffensiveness, zeal and glory, and ignominy. All these, the various dispositions of creatures, come from me. So in former days, the 7 great sages and the 4 Manus, who are of my nature, were born of my mind. He who knoweth perfectly this permanence and mystic faculty of mine becometh without doubt possessed of unshaken faith. I am the origin of all things proceed from me. Believing me to be thus, the wise, gifted with special wisdom, worship me. Their very hearts and minds are in me, enlightening one another and constantly speaking of me. They are full of enjoyment and satisfaction. To them, thus always devoted to me, who worship me with love, I give that mental devotion by which they come to me. For them do I, out of my compassion, standing within their hearts, destroy the darkness which springs from ignorance by the brilliant lamp of spiritual discernment. And now for today's talk, sleep, dreams, death.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome, friends. These three topics, sleep, dreams, and death, are commonest experiences of humanity. And even though every human soul sleeps every day, most of us dream every night, and every one of us is going to go through that process which is called death. Yet many people do not inquire into these subjects. They just know that that is the way it is. We come, everything is prepared for us in childhood. We sleep, we continue to sleep, and we don't know how to interpret our dreams. We don't know where they come from most of the time. And there is a tremendous prevailing ignorance on these subjects. We need to know that there's an intimate relationship between sleep and dreams, and also between death and dreams, between death and sleep. To understand these phenomena, science has made tremendous attempts in finding out exactly what they stand for, but in relation to dreams, their explanations are normally not adequate. They can classify them, and some of the dreams they can explain, but not all of them. So if we look at scientific knowledge, we see that collection of dreams are presented in books. Duperel is one of them, and another one was Frederick Myers. But when we read the book, even though these were conducted under control situations, we find that the explanation given is not satisfactory. But people normally ask, is there not any explanation for dreams? Can we not find out exactly what they stand for and if we can use them? Now, ancient psychology is exactly the same as the fundamental propositions of the teachings of Theosophy. And so when we present these topics, we're actually looking at them from the theosophical viewpoint. It is important to understand that this connectivity between the three exists, and that we can explain them. However, in order to truly be able to do that, we need to understand that man, as well as cosmos, is sevenfold. And we have given talks on these topics. It's not today's topic, and we won't be going into them, but we need to understand that we are not just constituted of a body. We have an inner astral, which is electromagnetic. Then we have jiva, which is the life principle. We have kama manas. We have the higher manasic principle. We have buddhi, and then atma, the seventh, that is not a personal principle but universal one. So how are these dreams caused? What are the various kinds, and what happens during the dreamless state? And what about our spiritual life during that period? Man, what we call man, is the self-conscious thinking intelligence who speaks of himself as I. This I is a distinct entity. I, who can think with the help of my mind. I, who can feel through the help of my emotions. I, who can sense with and through the help of my senses and sense organs. This I is distinct. He uses these instruments which are continuously and ever changing. This consciousness manifests different inherent properties of itself at different times, under different conditions. And this consciousness in reference to the body is called the waking consciousness. So when we refer to the body, we're talking about the waking consciousness, and in the voice of the silence, this is called Jagrat, Jagrata or Jagrat. This is the waking consciousness. And as said, this waking consciousness has inherent properties that it exhibits at different times. So now we're here all gathered together. A talk is being given. We're all in our conscious, waking consciousness. We're listening. We're debating as to whether what is being said is reasonable. We can accept it, reject it, but we are listening. We're listening to what is being presented, and this is done with our waking consciousness. It is, in fact, attentive. If we have to classify it, we would call it this waking consciousness is attentive. Is attentive. It's listening and verifying what is being said as acceptable or unacceptable. Sometimes when we sit in front of the fire in the winter, we're kind of dreaming. We're there, but we are fancying, we're imagining things, and we're inattentive. Even though our brain is not asleep and our senses are not asleep, nevertheless, we're not really awake. So as our body goes to sleep, our consciousness enters into a condition which is not waking. But in some of these studies, this is called a brown study. In other words, it represents that condition of waking dreaminess. Sometimes it's called a brown study in the writings. Brown study. Now, we need to understand that this consciousness works in and through our brain. It is not a product of the brain. It just uses and controls the brain, and its own inherent condition produces certain effects on the brain. And that something inherent in consciousness produces these various states of consciousness. At this moment, as said, we are fully awake. We are using our brain deliberately and consciously, and it is attentive. what is the condition of that consciousness when the body is asleep? It must be in some kind of condition for the reason that in waking consciousness, we kind of know what it is doing, what happens in the dream consciousness, what kind of experiences we have, and what happens to the body. We know that certain dreams are the result of the process taking place in the sleeping body. For instance, most nightmares are the result of activity of the brain which is affected by incomplete or incorrect digestion. There are other dreams which are not nightmares, and they're not the result of the brain processes. All of our dreams cannot be the effect of this cause, the nightmares that is caused by incomplete digestion. And they're not all related to the derangement of our health. And what about our consciousness when it is functioning apart and separate from the body? When we examine sleep, for all dreams are related to it. What happens is that the body gets tired, fatigued, exhausted, and it's kind of numb, paralyzed, and sleep comes as a result of it. But what is the cause of it? In Theosophy, this is explained by the life forces flowing into it. So that the sleep condition is caused by the life forces flowing into it. Flowing into it. So, as soon as we wake up in the morning, this life force starts saturating us with vitality of with these life forces. Our brain gets so saturated after a certain number of hours that it can no longer make a response to it on the plane of the senses, because during our waking consciousness, this is the capacity of the consciousness that responds to the impressions that come to us from senses and brain. So the life forces flowing into the body make the body temporarily numb, and so time is required to assimilate this life force. Assimilate. And this is why babies actually sleep a long time when they are very, very young, because their bodies cannot deal with the life force. They have to learn to do it as the body grows more and more. It can absorb the force a little bit easier. And so babies sleep a lot in order to get over the life force or assimilate it into their body. The whole of our brain is active in waking consciousness. So when we're going to the sleep process, the brain goes to sleep by degrees and in parts and sets the consciousness free. And he who was awake in the body is awake still, but has entered into a condition of dream consciousness. When in waking consciousness, our attention is relaxed and we fall into the brown study condition, a certain portion of our brain, that with which we reason and think, is kind of falling asleep. So our thinking active brain stops functioning and the dreaming portion takes full command. and causes certain kinds of dreams. All our nerves are continuously receiving and transmitting messages to this portion of our brain, though the consciousness which we speak of as the I is not in the body. This portion of the brain registers all the messages that come from all parts of the body. The same portion of the brain sometimes receives impressions from the consciousness, the I, and transmits to it its own messages. These messages, both ways, are registered in this portion of the brain and are remembered in the waking state of consciousness. So this double phenomena is at least responsible for three kinds of dreams that are common. First, caused in the dreaming brain by the action of the body and its various organs. Second, caused in the dreaming brain by the impressions made on it by the dreaming consciousness of the I. And the third is a mixture of these two. So most of our dreams can be traced to these. But something else happens to the consciousness that is set free. This consciousness is a ray of a larger consciousness, which we call our ego consciousness. This ego consciousness, which is spiritual, is continuously active all the time. In reference to the personal consciousness, we speak of the I, like Mr. So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so, Madame So-and-so. This we call personality, the reflection of the real I, the ego. This personal I consciousness is waking in reference to the body, is in a dream condition in reference to the body, and when it is set free in the sleep by the body, it comes into a closer relationship with the soul or our ego consciousness. When the disturbances in the body are at a very low ebb, the dreamer is not disturbed and turns more within himself, more inwards. When the sleeping body enters a condition of dreamless sleep, that is when even the dreaming brain has come to a low ebb, its activities that were going on does not affect the consciousness anymore. So he enters into a different condition. So what is this condition? When the body is going to sleep, the consciousness is still in contact with the body in the early stages of the sleep. Though out of the body, the consciousness is affected by the body and affects it in turn. What takes place in the body is impressed upon us. What we are brooding over affects the brain. Thus you get your two distinct classes of dreams, which we spoke about. On the automatic activity of the body and the brain, irrespective of the I consciousness. The I consciousness, when it returns in waking, seizes what the brain has been thinking, feels what the brain has been feeling, identifies itself with the brain activity. One kind of dreams which remember on waking. They are not the activities of the I consciousness, but the activities of the brain and the body, apart from the I consciousness. Now the second kind of dreams are cogitations, image makings, and reflections of the I consciousness. Apart from the body. These are apart from the body. So something has been going on within himself that is impressed on the brain, and that is another kind of dream. These are disordered, inchoate dreams. They're not organized. You will see why they are inchoate, because two sets of forces are mixed. the automatic activity of the brain and the activity of the dreamer. And sometimes when people wake up, they say, I don't know exactly what I dreamt. I cannot quite make any heads or tails out of it. It doesn't make any sense. We can take actually an example in our waking consciousness to understand what exactly happened. Now we are sitting here and listening to this talk. Suppose that something happened to you prior to your coming here, and your mind is preoccupied with what happened to you. So you're listening and you grasp some of the things that are being said, but other things are not quite clear because you are thinking as to the event that took place before you're coming here. So that is exactly what happens when we are in that dreamless state. During that period that you are inattentive, the brain does not retain what you were listening to. So it's kind of the same thing when you try to remember what was said and make a report of it, for instance. You find it disordered, and there are places where your own thoughts were there, and those obliterated points from the lecture or talk. So, thus, these disordered or inchoate dreams come about. And what about the coherent dreams? The brain receives a clear-cut impression of the broodings taking place in the dreamer, in that self-conscious I, and you have a clear-cut dream. What would it indicate? What would you do? How would you feel? Or what manner you would be affected or unaffected by the body? It doesn't always mean that you are going to get a better discriminating explanations of that dream without the sense of inertia which the body exerts on it. But nevertheless, when the consciousness is in that condition and disturbance in the body brings it back to the body, you suddenly kind of awaken. On the other hand, this I consciousness, the dreamer, is energized, affected by its own spiritual ego consciousness. All those rare and wonderful dreams which new psychology is not quite able to fully explain can become clearer through the teachings of Theosophy if we look at it from this perspective. Now, that I consciousness is a bit, only a portion, only a part of that ray, an aspect, but it is an aspect of a deeper and more wonderful, profounder consciousness, which is a spiritual superconsciousness. And when the body is quiet, when the body has set you free, when the senses do not hinder, and when you are turned within yourself, you are drawn towards that parent source. And we call this your own higher consciousness. So that parent source is the higher consciousness. Your own higher consciousness. We can kind of give a couple of examples. Samuel Taylor, who was an English poet, Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote Kubla Khan, and he said that he dreamt it, and when he woke up, he remembered it and wrote it down. We can definitely say that his consciousness was impressed by this higher consciousness. And another one was Tartini's Devil's Sonata. He also heard it in his dream. The devil was playing it, and On waking, he remembered it, wrote it down, but he couldn't remember all of it. The end was missing, and 2 years later, he dreamt again. The devil was playing. He woke up, but this time it was a violin that woke him up, a violin being played, and it was a blind beggar playing it. So he wrote it down, and that's how I finished that sonata. Intellectual people who are not spiritual in nature are not able to bring the memory of their nightly ego contact in the dreamless condition of the body because of the condition of their brains. The chaotic condition of the physical brain make it impossible for it to be correctly and fully impressed. But something else happens, and that experience, I think, perhaps we all of us had. While the dreamer is learning from his higher consciousness, he projects the gist or part of his experience on his brain that falls on the brain like a distant shadow. The brain catches it, and it catches what it can of it, and another kind of dream is a result. In catching and interpreting this, the brain weaves a language of symbols and emblems, language of pictures, which the eye consciousness doesn't understand. But with proper and painstaking analysis, each one can ultimately decipher this kind of dream for himself. The dream brain of each of us uses its own symbol language. So this dream brain uses a symbol language, and everybody has their own symbol language. So one person cannot really decipher another's symbol language. So dream brain has its own symbol language. Symbol language to be interpreted by each one of us for ourselves. We have to decipher what the symbols stand for. And then something else can also happen to the eye consciousness. It goes into a condition which can best be described as unison with the ego consciousness. The very reaching of this state depends on the nature of moral and mental of the eye consciousness, and which has intimate relation to the growth of the ego itself. It is very difficult to bring back the memory of that to the ordinary minds and brains. The eye consciousness always returns the way he had gone. So he comes from this condition of unison of dreamlessness to dreaming into the condition of waking consciousness. So we have to remember that by the time we come to the waking consciousness, some portions of what we have gathered is going to be lost. It is stated that materialists and skeptics devoid of all idealism do not touch the depths of dreamless sleep state, much less enjoy the benefits of the unison state. And of course, mentally lazy and all those who are limited by the life senses and emotions often fail to rise to the dreamless state even. So, all dreams then are therefore classified as, we will review what we said. 1, automatic activity of the brain. 2, automatic activity of the brain which affects the eye consciousness. 3, his activity which affects the brain. 4, activity of the ego which affects the eye consciousness only. 5, through him touches the brain. which weaves a tale in the language of symbols, six high and spiritual dreams. The memory of the contact, unison yoga between ourselves and the higher spiritual consciousness, which we really are. That's our true identity, and which has also its correspondence to our waking consciousness, of course. There is one other kind of dreams which is not really mentioned a lot, and this is a higher kind of dream, which is kind of a harbinger of good tidings, and this comes as a gift from those whose mission of mercy and love is to help and bless. And profane humanity knows of this not at all. So these are the varied kinds of dreams. And what do you think they depend on? What is the process that regulates it? And what is the process that we can regulate our dreams? Is this possible? Theosophy says that it is. Theosophy says yes, that we can regulate our dreams. And we can train our body and brain to be quiet, not to be nervous or neurotic, to be collected and calm, so that it behaves as it should be in that dream state. The training of the body, its senses and sense organs, and the training of the brain, especially that part that lies in the back of the brain, and as well as alertness and attention, which is belonging to frontal, and also considering what meditation really is, and not going along with pseudo prescriptions, so to speak, of what meditation is. The waking consciousness is at a disadvantage when the I consciousness is not there, because that is the control. So we need to be aware of that as well. Our higher ego is as helpless in that dream state to warn us, because it's even more elusive than the waking consciousness, and we have difficulty hearing that inner consciousness warning us, trying to tell us to do, not to do what we're about to do. Now, from dreams, let us go to death. What is the relation between sleep and death? And what are the conditions of death? Well, it's exactly the same, actually, with only one difference. The I consciousness does not return back to the body. While we sleep, the communicating link between the body and the I consciousness is maintained. When that link gets a snap, so then we have the phenomena, what is called death. The communication between the ego consciousness and body is severed, in other words. Now, how shall we use this whole knowledge on the subject of dreams and sleep? If it is a fact, and it definitely is a fact, that we have this higher spiritual consciousness, we must try to handle the whole personality in a definitive way. We should obtain in our waking consciousness the freedom of action for that higher spiritual ego, which is our real true self. We want to get out of the habit of thinking that we are the lower self and that our higher self is different, somewhere far away, but get into the habit of recognizing ourselves as spiritual, as the higher, affecting, energizing, embodying the lower self. At the moment, we go along the line of thought and feeling and action without really ascertaining whether these are the lines of thought, feeling, and action that the spiritual consciousness, that ego consciousness adopts. We do not bring this I consciousness in line with the higher spiritual sense, then we're going to continue to have our difficulties. How does this work? Who guides it? Well, we know that I consciousness normally gathers information from our environment, so mostly it's our senses that affect it. So things from the outside drag us down into a particular line of thought, feeling, action, and this higher consciousness is helpless, more or less. So when we look around, we can definitely recognize that most people are in this condition, that they are not able to control that I consciousness. Well, suppose that we learned how to do it, then what will be the result? Well, what do you think it would be the result? Obviously, we would be like gods, immortals, pacing the paths of mortality in the service of men. So when we control the I consciousness, we come like gods. Not gods. Walking the path of humanity in the service of humanity. So there is a particular feeling, a particular activity, and particular thought process that this higher ego, this is our spiritual self, is continuously involved in. The ego is not interested in anything that is not spiritual. All the emotion that it can express are those that are rooted in the great emotion of compassion. All of its activities are for the energizing of its personalities, in other words, the I consciousness, and teaching it how to behave. Its knowledge is power, its love is wisdom, and all of its actions are sacrificial. It's sacrifice. If all our actions were of the nature of sacrifice, all our love was of the nature of wisdom, all our knowledge was of the nature of the strength and the spiritual, then we would be living the life of the ego at all times. How does knowledge give us this spiritual strength at this moment? Does it do the work? No. The lower knowledge is comparative knowledge. It is dependent on books, encyclopedias, and at this time of the 21st century, on the web and how we obtain our information. So it kind of provides us with a kind of scientific vicarious atonement. The lower kind of love is not wise, we all know that. The quality of wisdom is absent from it because it's personal love. Lower kind of actions are not sacrificial, but bind us to our objects of possession and cause sorrow. The knowledge we have has to become power. The love we have has to become wisdom. The action has to be sacrifice. And those who exhibit these qualities are the marks that they are living an ego consciousness functioning in the personality. Okay, We will repeat the last sentence. The knowledge that is power, the love which is wisdom, the action which is sacrifice. These are the marks of the ego consciousness that's functioning in the personality. Such function transforms the brain. And of course then what ensues is that for the ordinary man, when it is time to sleep, for the wise man, it is time to be awake. And this is expressed in the Gita. From the viewpoint of now, at this moment, our higher consciousness is not really functioning at all times. We're all in a condition of shadowiness. Some lives are nightmares, some lives are incoherent, some dreams are incoherent, some lives are pleasant and fanciful dreams. But when we look at the spiritual life, that the spiritual consciousness is purposeful and makes the brain, the senses, the feelings and thoughts, energies and instruments of the higher consciousness. And similarly, of course, there would be no death, for death is but the condition of a sleep that has become permanent for that lifespan. As we know, in each incarnation, we're a different personality, and that personality lives only one life, and at the end of it, the connection is severed. So death, for that reason, becomes permanent for a duration where we will rest in Devakan, assimilate what we have learned before we return. Thus, to so energize, to so train the personal consciousness that it becomes self-luminous, enlightened, that it does not shine by borrowed light, but by the inherent light of its own parent soul, that would make birth and death illusion. That is yoga, that is the union with the Lord. But there is no Lord save our own higher self. It is not real practicing or meditation to go sit in a room and control our breathing and gaze into space. The real spiritual development of beings begin when we regard ourselves as immortal egos, whose actions are sacrifices, whose knowledge is power, whose love is wisdom, and that makes the heart enlightened, the brain sympathetic, which is the very different thing from having a sympathetic heart and an intelligent mind. It is the sympathetic heart and the non-intelligent mind that produces the chaos in the world, or the intelligent mind and non-sympathetic heart. And even the sympathetic heart and the intelligent mind, which so many leaders of our world exhibit and possess, are not able to save the civilization. The difference between the good man and the spiritual man lies in this fact. The good man has a sympathetic heart and an intelligent mind, but the spiritual man has a compassionate intelligence and an enlightened heart. And in his case, or in this case, mercy and justice become one. So then, now we can understand why those great masters are spoken as masters of wisdom and compassion. They are beings who have enlightened hearts and sympathetic understanding intelligence. They are full waking consciousness of the real kind. Their condition is above dreams and death, above the conditions of sleep and waking. So, the practice of attaining that begins with the assumption of our rightful heritage as immortal beings, and in our efforts to transform the personality so that it allows through that streaming forth of radiance, glory, and light of the self that is the spiritual life. That can come to us as an experience every day when the body is asleep and the dreamer goes home, however momentary that may be. And if we would train our senses, feelings, emotions, and thoughts, we would see in sleep not just the refreshment of the body only, but the real refreshment and recreation of the soul, who in contact with its parent ego gains additional knowledge which cannot be gained in the world of mortality, and returns with that to make the world of mortality into an immortal world. That is the teaching of Theosophy, and sleep, dreams, death become wonderful instruments of self-conscious beings, which we are if we would intelligently use all our faculties and powers by the right understanding of this great master philosophy. Thank you for joining us. We hope to see you next week.